That's going to be a piece of steel. And then they're probably going to throw on some, maybe some copper. Copper lubricates better than steel, right? Problem with copper is it's softer than steel, correct?
Yeah.
But it's probably harder than the things that are floating around in the engine. So they're going to put some antimony on top of that, another layer. Antimony is softer than copper. Now we're getting into embeddability issues. Okay. So if you've got a piece of, go ahead. Antimony is a metal. It's an alloy. You know, it's a little bit of tin, a little bit of lead, a little bit of, excuse me, I shouldn't say that. Antimony is a separate metal. My bad. And then they're going to throw Babbitt in. Babbitt is an alloy. That's going to be antimony, tin, lead, things of that sort. And what they're doing here is these two top layers, usually it's two, is going to be soft, so when a piece of sand or grit or something comes by, it will embed in here rather than scar up your shaft. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, if you look at these thrust washers, new thrust washer, old thrust washer, this still works fine, but they put the lead and the antimony on top of it and the soft embeddability stuff, and it just simply wears off because it's soft. Okay, I don't know if there was a problem here or not, but this is a thrust washer as opposed to an engine bearing, so the load concerns are different. Does that make sense? You know, how much force do I have slamming that shaft back and forth? Depends on the shaft, depends on the engine, depends on the driver. Okay. I'll grab that one. Okay. This stuff, on the other hand, is very hard. Okay. The rollers are, well, actually, what's the hardest part of a friction bearing? Anti-friction bearing. What's the hardest part of it? No, I said, what's the hardest part of an anti-friction bearing? That means there's three parts, right? What's the hard part? What is the hardest part of those three?
Well, I've seen the casing give way, but not the bearing.
I'm asking hardest. Let me back up. Hardness. Tensile strength. Shear strength. Ductility. Okay, who knows what all those words are? How many? No, how many know what all the words are? Nobody. How many of you know what half of those words are? Okay, now we're getting someplace. You're going to learn the other half today. There's more than this, but this is going to be a start. Okay, hardness. There's what they, if you took chemistry or physics, there's a scale called the Rockwell hardness, and it goes from 1 to 10. 10 being a diamond, 0 being chalk. I'm serious. That's what 0 is chalk. Okay, so if glass is about an 8 or a 9, it's harder than steel. Okay, so that's purely a hardness thing. It has nothing to do with wear. Usually, if you've got something real hard, what does it not do well? It doesn't deform well. If you hit a piece of mild steel with a hammer, it'll deform or it'll bend, right? You hit a piece of something really hard with a hammer, it shatters, correct? You hit a piece of glass with a hammer, it's in a lot of pieces, correct? Okay. Same thing with the bearing races. They are hard, outside race or inside. You hit it with a hammer and it shatters, it's going to shatter like a piece of glass. Everybody's good with that? Okay. You can take a piece of angle iron, hit it all day long, and all you do is wear your hammer and your arm out, correct? Okay. Tensile strength. That's how strong a bolt is, or a screw, or a stud, or something. Okay, so what they end up doing is, let's take a piece of shaft. You want to find out how strong it is? They clamp it in here, they clamp it in there, and they pull it apart. And that's how they measure tensile strength. Okay, shear strength, they're going to take the same thing, but they're going to mount it a little differently. Set it on the table, clamp it in, and then they're going to put a big weight right here and see how much weight it takes to shear that off. Is everybody good with that? Maybe. All right. I'll give you a technical term here. Single shear and double shear. Okay. If I have a piece of flat stock and I drill a hole through it and I want to bolt it to another piece of stock with a hole through it. Now I put a bolt through there. That's called single shear. Because when I push on this, I'm going to be trying to shear that bolt from this piece. Does that make sense? Okay. And it is inferior to double shear. Okay. Now when I push down on this bolt is supported on both sides. Okay. Without that, everything wants to go cockeyed a little bit. This is going to give you a straighter pull. For instance, this might be a forked clevis. Like you're going to put your foot on a brake pedal or something, and that would push that pin into the master cylinder as an example. Does that make sense to everybody? I know some of you haven't looked at a lot of this and you're trying to go off my ugly pictures, and that's a shame, but that's all I got. Okay, we're still good then. Now, going back to the hardness question. I don't even remember what the hardness question was at this point.
What was the hardest part on the bearing?
Oh, the races are. The races are much harder than the rollers. The rollers, when you put a load on them, they're going to deform, whereas the race is not supposed to deform at all.
Race?
What?
Race?
Yeah. And the cage is pretty soft too. That's just steel. Okay. When you look at a bearing and all the balls and rollers roll around in it, that's all that cage is supposed to do, is keep them separated. Video covered this yesterday, but not well. It's a tapered roller. Okay. You're going to get edge wear occasionally on these. So look, if you're trying to figure out if this roller is worn out and you see a lot of shoulder wear, the bearing is probably worn out. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's something else to look at or consider. If you've got a lot of shoulder wear on one side of it, that means that bearing is getting more wear in that area than the engineer designed into that bearing. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, everybody understands that one of these is a Torrington bearing and one of those would be a roller bearing, and they do different loads, correct? If it's a tapered roller bearing, then we're getting a combination load depending on what angle we have, correct? So if you see a lot of wear here, then maybe what you need is a bearing that's got more taper to it. Does that make sense? Can I buy a bearing with more taper and have it fit? Yes, I can, because the bearings are sold as sets. Inner race, roller, and outer race, correct? So everything matches. So yes, you can do that if you run into that problem. What are you doing at that point? You are re-engineering the transmission, are you not? You are correcting a mistake that somebody with 5 times as much technical education than you screwed up in the first place, right? Remember that sheet of paper that I had out that said this is all the technical service warnings I got for a year? Guess what? The engineers didn't get any smarter. They're still sending TSBs out every day. So you're still going to have to improve things. Where do you not get to improve things? Who doesn't let you improve things? Factory warranty. That's a genuine Chevy part. We're putting a genuine Chevy part back, or a genuine Isuzu whatever. Is everybody understanding that? If you work for AMCO Transmissions, they say, yeah, they screwed it up. Make it as better as you can, as quick as you can. Experiment. Okay, let's see. Oh, one other thing on the. Okay, here's a bushing. What's that hole for? I already told you it could be an oil fill, right? Or it could be, you know, to fill, to lube something. Here's the other, this is a drain. Okay, I'm going to put a seal right here, like on the back of the transmission or the front of it. And if this bushing wears out, it's going to leak more oil and get more oil to that seal, right? Which we don't necessarily want. So what they do is they drill a hole in the bottom of it. So if the oil gets back halfway through it, then it starts to drain out the bottom and run back into the sump in the transmission or engine or whatever else you would have. Does that make sense? So if you put this bushing in and it's not clocked right, what happens?
The oil's not gonna go
I
in.
have a leak now. Everybody's getting that? Okay. Okay, here's 3 rules you're going to write down. Rule 1, apply force only to the press side fit of the bearing. That may seem logical at this point, but when I see you put things in the press and you don't have them set up right, I'll know that you memorized it and didn't understand it. When you press only the press fit side of the bearing, okay? For instance, this particular bearing has got 2 press fit sides to it. The outside and the inside are both press fit, right? Okay, so when I'm pressing this in, let's see, how did I phrase that? Apply force only to the press fit side of the bearing. So I'm not going to put any force on this because that's not press fit. That bearing is press fit onto this though, right? Okay. So am I talking inner, outer, or the outer? Which one am I going to support on this? The inner race. That's the one that's press fit. So I'm going to support that inner race somehow. I'm going to get something under there that supports the inner. If I just grab the outer race, what do? I'm just pulling the outside off of the bearing, right? I have destroyed the bearing. Okay. The other side is going to be, sometimes the outside will be the press fit. And you'll have to press on the you'll have to press on the outside to get it done. Otherwise you destroy the bearing from the inside out. Is that good? Okay. Again, we'll see if you remember that. Yesterday I was talking about a puller for the bushing on the flywheel or the crankshaft. There's your puller. You got 2 little bitty teeth here. They go in. That sits on the flywheel or the crank. And as you screw that in, these will spread out, and then you're just going to turn this, and that will pull this out and bearing. Everybody knows how the puller works. Everybody's good with figuring pullers out? Okay. I don't want to make this too basic. But if you need to demo, I will be happy to demo. Let's see. Okay, it's probably about time that I start instituting the don't leave the classroom while I'm lecturing if you can't help it. Anyway.
What was rule number 2 and 3?
Oh, I'm getting to those. Never spin a bearing with compressed air. And always wear eye protection because bearings explode.